Marcus Chen walked through the empty halls of what used to be the Pentagon. His footsteps echoed against marble floors that had once belonged to Earth's most powerful military headquarters. Now it was just a museum, a tomb for humanity's violent past. The Krell didn't allow humans to have weapons anymore. They said it was for humanity's own good. They said humans were like children playing with fire, destined to burn themselves unless someone wiser stepped in. 15 years ago, they had arrived in their massive ships and declared Earth a protected zone. They dismantled every army, confiscated every weapon, and assigned every human a role in their new peaceful society. Marcus's role was to catalog the past. He scanned old military documents into the Confederation database so alien scholars could study human warfare like it was a disease. The Krell found it fascinating that humans had spent so much energy killing each other. They didn't understand it. None of the advanced species did. His workstation sat in what used to be a war room. The screens that once showed battlefields now displayed alien text. Marcus spoke English, but he had to learn Krell formal script to do his job. It hurt his eyes. The letters twisted in ways that human letters shouldn't twist. "You're working late again," a voice said behind him. Marcus turned. Dr. Sarah Okonkwo stood in the doorway, carrying 2 cups of something that smelled like coffee but wasn't. Real coffee was a luxury now. The Confederation rationed it because caffeine was considered a mild stimulant, and stimulants made humans harder to control. "Someone has to finish cataloging the Korean War archives," Marcus said, taking the cup. "The Varath researcher wants them by next week." Sarah sat down across from him. She was older than Marcus by 20 years, old enough to remember the pacification clearly. She had been a professor of military history before the aliens came. Now she worked alongside Marcus, feeding humanity's bloody history into alien computers. "Did you hear about Berlin?" Sarah asked quietly. Marcus had heard. Everyone had heard. A human child had wandered into a restricted zone. A Varath administrator's security drone had identified the child as an unauthorized presence and eliminated the threat. That was how the report phrased it. Eliminated the threat. The child had been 8 years old. "They apologized," Marcus said, though the words tasted bitter. "They gave the family compensation credits," Sarah said. "Like that matters. Like you can trade credits for a child." They sat in silence for a moment. Outside the window, Marcus could see the Krell watchtower that overlooked the city. There was one in every major population center. The towers were beautiful in a terrible way. All smooth white surfaces and glowing blue lights. They monitored everything. Neural scanners detected aggression. Weapon sensors detected anything more dangerous than a kitchen knife. And pacifier fields could knock out entire city blocks if the Krell decided it was necessary. "I have something to show you," Sarah said. She pulled out a data chip, the old-fashioned humankind that the aliens didn't monitor as carefully as their own technology. "But not here. Can you come to my apartment tonight?" Marcus looked at her carefully. Sarah's expression was neutral, but her eyes were serious. Whatever was on that chip, it was dangerous. "I'll be there," he said. Sarah's apartment was small, like all human housing under the Confederation. The aliens said humans didn't need much space. They said smaller living areas promoted efficient use of resources. Marcus thought it was another way to control them, to keep them packed together where they could be watched more easily. Sarah locked the door and pulled the curtains closed. She inserted the chip into an old laptop, the kind that had no network connection. The screen flickered to life. "I've been keeping records," Sarah said. "Real records, not the sanitized versions we give the Confederation." The screen showed videos. Marcus recognized some of them from his work. Battle footage from World War II, the Vietnam War, the Finnish, resistance against the Soviet Union. But there were other files too. Recent files. Protests against the Confederation that had been erased from official records. Humans who had resisted and disappeared. The girl in Berlin wasn't the first child killed by Confederation security. She was just the first one people were talking about. "Why are you showing me this?" Marcus asked. Before Sarah could answer, there was a knock at the door. 3 sharp raps, a pause, then 2 more. Sarah's expression relaxed slightly. "That's her," Sarah said. The woman who entered looked about 60, with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and hands that were rough with calluses. She moved differently than most humans Marcus knew. Most people under the Confederation had developed a careful, hesitant way of moving, always aware of the watchtowers and scanners. This woman moved like she didn't care who was watching. "Marcus Chun," the woman said, studying him. "Sarah says you can be trusted. Trusted with what?" Marcus asked. "My name is Elena Vasquez," the woman said. "Before the pacification, I was a special forces operator. I taught soldiers how to survive behind enemy lines, how to fight when you're outnumbered and outgunned, how to win when winning seems impossible." She sat down at Sarah's small table and gestured for them to join her. "The Confederation thinks they've domesticated us," Elena continued. "They think 15 years is enough to breed the fight out of humanity. They're wrong. I've spent 15 years building a network of people who remember what we used to be. Not the bad parts, the wars, and the hate, but the good parts too. The courage, the sacrifice, the refusal to kneel." Marcus felt something stir in his chest, something he hadn't felt in a long time. It might have been hope. It might have been fear. Maybe it was both. "What do you want from us?" he asked. Elena smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a soldier who had just been given impossible orders and decided to try anyway. "I want you to help humanity remember how to fight back." The network met in basements and tunnels, in places the Confederation sensors couldn't quite reach. Marcus learned that the alien technology had blind spots. The neural scanners worked perfectly above ground, but old subway systems and sewer networks confused them. The Krell had never needed to look underground. Their homeworld didn't have underground spaces. They built everything upward, toward the light. Alana's people exploited every weakness. They were janitors who cleaned alien facilities and memorized patrol patterns. They were technicians who maintained the watchtowers and knew when the sensors cycled off for maintenance. They were teachers who educated human children in the approved Confederation curriculum, but whispered the old stories. During recess, Marcus and Sarah's job was to provide the knowledge. Every military manual, every tactical guide, every historical account of asymmetric warfare went into the network. The people needed to remember not just that humans had fought, but how they had fought when outmatched. "Look at this," Marcus said one night, showing Elena footage from the Winter War. The Finns faced the Soviet army with a fraction of their numbers. They used the terrain. They struck fast and disappeared. They made the enemy afraid of the forest. Elena watched carefully. She was always watching, always learning. The Krell don't have forests on their world. They don't understand ambush tactics. Their military doctrine is about overwhelming force applied directly. "Then we do the opposite," Sarah said. "We don't face them directly. We make them chase shadows." The planning took months. Elena's network grew. Former soldiers found each other through careful whispers and coded messages. But it wasn't just soldiers. It was doctors who could treat injuries without reporting to alien medical facilities. It was engineers who understood how to build things from scavenged materials. It was mathematicians who could calculate blast radii and timing, sequences in their heads. Marcus met a man named James who had been a high school chemistry teacher. James showed him compounds that could be made from cleaning supplies and fertilizer. Nothing sophisticated, nothing the Confederation would recognize as weapons technology. Just chemicals that have been available to humans for centuries. The aliens watch for nuclear material, for weapons-grade components, James explained. They don't watch for soap and plant food. They don't think in terms of improvised devices. The more Marcus learned, the more he understood Elena's strategy. Humanity wouldn't match the Confederation's technology. They would go backward, to weapons and tactics so old that the aliens had no defense protocols for them. In Shanghai, a woman named Lin demonstrated traditional archery to a group of teenagers. The bows were made from flexible plastic pipes, the arrows from metal rods. The Confederation's energy shields could stop plasma bolts and laser fire. They weren't designed to stop a piece of sharpened metal moving at 200 feet per second. In Lagos, a former combat instructor named Adebayo taught knife fighting in the ruins of an old military base. The blades were ceramic, undetectable by metal scanners. Adebayo had fought in the pacification. He had killed 3 Krellin forces before their neural pacifiers overwhelmed him. He remembered how they die like anything else, Adebayo told his students. They bleed. They hurt. They're afraid. They've just forgotten what fear feels like. Elena called a meeting of the network's leadership 6 months before the planned uprising. They gathered in an abandoned water treatment plant beneath New York City. There were 12 of them, one for each major city in the network. We need to be clear about what this is, Elena said. This isn't about winning. We can't defeat the Confederation fleet. We can't drive them off Earth. This is about sending a message. What message? Asked a man from Mumbai. That we're not pets, Elena said. That we're not children. That protection without consent is just another word for prison. And humans don't do well in cages. Marcus spoke up. But they'll retaliate. The enforcement fleet could sterilize entire cities. Yes, Elena said quietly. They could. And we're betting they won't. The room went silent. Sarah broke it. You're betting on their morality, she said. You're betting that species who claim to be beyond violence will choose not to commit genocide. It's not much of a bet, Elena admitted. But it's the only one we have. We either stay on our knees forever, or we stand up and find out if their principles are real. The vote was unanimous. They would proceed. The date was set for the 50th anniversary of the pacification. The Confederation had planned celebrations, a demonstration of how peaceful and prosperous humanity had become under their guidance. Instead, they would get a reminder. 2 weeks before the uprising, Marcus received an unexpected visitor at the Pentagon. A Krell ambassador named Threlker, one of the senior administrators for Earth. Threlker had always shown more interest in human culture than most of his kind. He collected old Earth books and sometimes asked Marcus questions about human history that went beyond his assigned research. Mr. Chan, Threlker said, his translator rendering his clicks and whistles into English. I have noticed patterns in your research requests. You have been accessing materials related to resistance movements, guerrilla warfare, insurgency tactics. Marcus's heart hammered. He kept his face neutral. It's part of my assigned cataloging. The Vorath researchers requested comprehensive documentation. Threlker studied him with his multifaceted eyes. Krell were difficult to read, but Marcus thought he saw something that might have been sadness. I want you to know something, Threlker said. There are many in the Confederation who oppose the occupation of Earth. We were overruled. The majority believed humanity needed protection. But if humanity were to demonstrate that they do not wish to be protected, if they were to make their autonomy known in a way the Confederation could not ignore, it would reopen the debate. He paused, then added, it would also likely result in significant loss of human life. The hardliners would demand a military response. I would not be able to stop it. Marcus met the alien's gaze. Are you warning me or encouraging me? I am doing what my conscience requires, Frelker said. The choice, as always, belongs to humanity. He left. Marcus sat alone in the empty war room, surrounded by the ghosts of old battles, and waited for the new one to begin. The attacks happened at dawn across 12 cities simultaneously. In New York, Elena's team struck the main Confederation Administrative Center with thermite charges made from rust and aluminum powder. The building didn't explode so much as it melted, its support structure turning to liquid metal in temperatures the aliens hadn't planned for. In Chicago, fighters used the old freight tunnels to move under the Krell Watchtower and planted shaped charges at its base. The tower came down in a shower of white debris and blue sparks. The neural pacifiers went offline across the whole district. Mumbai's team went after the central data hub where the Confederation stored all their surveillance records. They didn't destroy it. They broadcasted it. Every human on Earth suddenly had access to 15 years of secret files showing exactly how closely they had been watched, how completely their privacy had been violated. In Shanghai, Lin and her archers attacked a Varath convoy with arrows that had been dipped in a chemical compound James had designed. The compound reacted with the crystalline structure of Varath bodies, causing cascading fractures. The aliens shattered like glass. Lagos, Berlin, Tokyo, Sydney, Sao Paulo, Mexico City, Cairo, Moscow. Every strike was different. Every strike used the terrain, the old infrastructure, the blind spots in alien security doctrine. The Confederation had prepared for human violence using energy weapons and conventional explosives. They hadn't prepared for thermite, for crossbows, for tunnels and sewers and tactics from wars. Their databases barely documented. The human casualties were heavy. Krell enforcers responded with their neural pacifiers, dropping hundreds of fighters unconscious. Varath security drones fired on crowds. In Cairo, an entire city block was leveled when a Confederation defense platform misidentified a hospital as a staging ground. But the attacks accomplished what Elena had planned. They proved that humanity wasn't beaten. They proved that 15 years of occupation hadn't erased what humans were capable of when pushed too far. Marcus watched from the Pentagon as the Confederation's response unfolded. Their enforcement fleet moved into low Earth orbit, weapons charging. The ships were massive, each one capable of reducing a city to ash from space. Threlker had been right. The hardliners were demanding blood, but something else was happening too. The attacks had stopped, but humans hadn't gone back to work. They had poured into the streets. Billions of them. In every city, every town, every settlement on Earth, they stood in silent witness, unarmed, and simply refused to move. The neural pacifiers could knock out thousands, but not millions, not billions. The Krell tried in Beijing, dropping 50,000 people unconscious. The humans who were still standing carried them to the sides of the streets and took their places. More came. There were always more. Sarah found Marcus at his workstation. "It's time," she said. They had prepared for this moment. Marcus had backdoor access to the Confederation's communication network, a vulnerability he had discovered months ago and never reported. Now he used it. Every screen on Earth, every alien communication device, every holographic display in every Confederation facility suddenly showed the same thing. Marcus's face, broadcasting from the heart of the Pentagon. "My name is Marcus Chun," he said in English. The Confederation's translators would render it into every known language. "I am a human. For 15 years, my species has lived under your protection. You saved us from destroying ourselves. You gave us peace. But you never asked us if that was what we wanted." Behind him, Sarah began playing the footage. Humanity's history, unfiltered. The wars, the atrocities, the darkness, but also the courage. The soldiers who charged machine guns to save their friends. the medics who ran into fire to reach the wounded, the ordinary people who hid refugees in their homes, who resisted tyranny knowing they would die for it. You look at our history and see violence, Marcus continued. We see sacrifice. You see destruction. We see the price we paid for the things we love. You think our capacity for violence is a flaw. We think it's inseparable from our capacity to protect, to defend, to refuse to abandon each other even when survival demands it. The footage shifted. The little girl in Berlin. The protesters who had disappeared. The secret files from Mumbai showing just how completely humanity had been controlled. You offered us peace, Marcus said. But peace without freedom is just a comfortable cage. You offered us protection. But protection without consent is just a prettier word for prison. We are not asking for your permission to be free. We are telling you that we were always free. You just didn't ask. He leaned forward, looking directly into the camera. You claim to be beyond violence, to have evolved past the brutality that defines our species. Then prove it. You have ships in our orbit that could end all human life in minutes. You have the power to punish us for daring to resist. So here is our question. If you have truly evolved, if your morality is more than just convenience, then choose not to destroy us. Choose to recognize that we have the right to make our own mistakes, fight our own battles, and build our own future. Even if that future includes the possibility of violence. The broadcast ended. Marcus sat back in his chair, suddenly exhausted. Sarah put a hand on his shoulder. That was good, she said. It won't be enough, Marcus replied. Maybe not. But it was true. That matters. Above Earth, in the Confederation Council ship, the debate raged. The enforcement fleet commanders demanded immediate action. The hardliners called for orbital strikes. Humanity had proven they were too dangerous to be left autonomous. But other voices spoke too. Threlker presented his case, arguing that the occupation had violated the Confederation's own founding principles. A Varith philosopher pointed out that species who imposed peace through force were no different than conquerors. The delegate from the Sorrow species, a people who had nearly destroyed themselves before joining the Confederation, spoke of the importance of allowing each species to find their own path. The vote was called. Continue the occupation with military force, or withdraw and offer Earth provisional membership with autonomy. It took 3 hours. When the result came through, it passed by a single vote. The enforcement fleet would withdraw. Humanity would be granted self-governance. But Earth's solar system would be quarantined. No Confederation ships in, no human ships out. If humanity wanted to join the wider galaxy, they would have to prove they could advance without destroying themselves. They would have to earn it. Marcus heard the news and felt something break inside him. Not break as in shatter. Break as in crack open. Like the shell around a seed. They had won. Humanity had chosen to fight back, and somehow, impossibly, they had won. The Confederation ships left Earth's orbit in a slow, deliberate procession. Each massive vessel moved with the careful dignity of a departing occupier who wanted to make clear that they were choosing to leave, not being driven out. Marcus watched them go from the Pentagon's observation deck, the same place where 15 years earlier he had watched them arrive. The celebrations had already begun in the cities. Humans danced in the streets, tore down the propaganda posters, painted over the alien script on government buildings. In some places, the celebrations turned into riots. 15 years of frustration had to go somewhere. Atlanta's people worked to contain it, to keep the joy from becoming destruction. They had fought for freedom, not chaos, but underneath the celebration was grief. The final casualty count was devastating. 8,000 dead from the initial strikes. Another 12,000 from the Confederation's response and the chaos that followed. 20,000 humans who would never see the freedom they had fought for. Sarah found Marcus at the observation deck. She didn't say anything, just stood beside him and watched the last Confederation ship disappear into the darkness. "Threlker left something for you," she said eventually, handing him a data chip. "He gave it to me this morning before they departed." Marcus turned the chip over in his hands. It was Krell technology, more advanced than anything humans had been allowed to keep. "What is it?" "Intelligence. The full political structure of the Confederation. Which species hold power, which ones are dissatisfied, where the fault lines are. He said you might need it." "Why would we need it?" "They're leaving us alone." Sarah smiled grimly. "He said something else, too. He said the Confederation is old and comfortable. It hasn't been challenged in 1,000 years. He thinks what we did here is going to echo. Other species are watching. Some of them have been under Confederation control for centuries, being protected whether they want it or not. We showed them that resistance is possible." Marcus looked at the chip with new understanding. Threlker hadn't just been documenting human violence. He had been watching a revolution, and he believed it might spread. "That's terrifying," Marcus said. "Yes," Sarah agreed. "It is." The memorial service was held in Central Park, where one of the worst battles had taken place. They had cleared the debris and planted 20,000 trees, one for each person who had died. It would take decades for the trees to grow, but humans thought in generations now, not just years. Elena spoke at the service. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of what she had set in motion. She read the names. Not all of them. That would have taken days, but enough. Enough to remember that each number in the casualty count had been a person with a name, a family, a life they had been willing to trade for humanity's choice. "We asked them to die for an idea," Elena said, her voice carrying across the silent crowd. "The idea that humans have the right to choose their own path, even if that path leads to mistakes, even if it leads to pain. We traded 20,000 lives for the freedom of billions. I don't know if that was the right choice. I'll spend the rest of my life wondering. But I know it was the choice they made willingly." She paused, looking out at the crowd. Marcus saw tears on her weathered face. "So we owe them something. We owe them the promise that their sacrifice meant something. That we won't waste this freedom on the same old patterns of hate and division. That will build something worthy of the price they paid." The crowd was silent. Then someone started singing. Marcus recognized the tune, an old protest song from before the Confederation. Others joined in. It wasn't a war song or a victory anthem. It was a song about hope, about continuing forward despite the darkness. 3 years later, Marcus stood in a very different place. The launch facility was in the Mojave Desert, built from scratch with human ingenuity and scavenged materials. No Confederation technology, no shortcuts. Just human engineers solving problems the hard way. The ship was ugly by alien standards. Where Confederation vessels were smooth and elegant, this was all angles and exposed framework. But it was theirs. Humanity's first faster-than-light vessel, designed from fundamental physics, principles that human scientists had worked out through sweat and mathematics. They had named it. Hope. Sarah stood beside Marcus, now the director of Earth's space program. Elena was there too, older, and walking with a cane from injuries sustained during the uprising. She had turned down a dozen government positions to instead teach at a small military academy, training a new generation of soldiers who would hopefully never need to fight. "Do you think it'll work?" Marcus asked, watching the final pre-flight checks. "Probably not," Sarah said cheerfully. "The calculations suggest a 30% chance of catastrophic failure on the first jump. Those are terrible odds. They're human odds. We've done more with worse." The pilot was a woman named Kim, daughter of one of the fighters who had died in Seoul during the uprising. She had volunteered knowing the risks. When asked why, She had said simply that her mother had died to give humanity choices. She wanted to honor that by choosing something impossible. The launch countdown began. Marcus thought about everything that had led to this moment. The occupation, the resistance, the vote that had passed by a single margin, the 3 years of backbreaking work to prove humanity could advance without Confederation help. The quarantine was still in place. The Confederation watched from beyond the solar system, waiting to see if humans would destroy themselves. Some of them hoped humanity would fail. Others, like Threlker, hoped they would succeed. Either way, this launch was the test. Hope's engines ignited. The ship lifted slowly at first, then faster, climbing toward space on a pillar of flame. Marcus held his breath as it breached the atmosphere and began its approach to the jump point. Sarah squeezed his hand. Whatever happens next, we did this ourselves. The ship reached the calculated jump coordinates. For a moment, it hung in space, visible on the tracking screens. Then reality bent around it in ways that human physics said shouldn't be possible, but were. Hope disappeared, folding space around itself, jumping toward a star system 12 light-years away. The crowd erupted in cheers. They wouldn't know if the jump was successful for hours, when Hope either reappeared at the target system or didn't. But just attempting, it was victory enough. Marcus looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Confederation was watching. Other species were watching too, the ones who lived under protection they hadn't asked for. The message was the same one humanity had sent 3 years ago, but broader now. We choose our own path. We make our own mistakes. We build our own future. The future might include more conflict. It probably would. Humans were still human, still capable of the same violence and tribalism that had nearly destroyed them before the Confederation arrived. But it was their violence, their choice, their chance to do better or do worse on their own terms. Elena leaned on her cane and smiled. Your kids are going to inherit something incredible, she said to no one in particular. They're going to inherit a universe that doesn't know what to do with us. Sarah laughed. That's what scares me. Good, Elena said. Fear means you're paying attention. Hope means you're moving forward anyway. Hours later, the signal came through. Hope had successfully jumped to the target system, conducted basic scans, and jumped back. The ship was damaged but functional. Kim was alive and laughing over the radio, describing the view of an alien sun that no human had ever seen before. Marcus stood in the Mojave Desert under the night sky and let himself feel the weight of what humanity had accomplished. They had fought for their freedom. They had buried their dead. They had built something from nothing. And now they were reaching toward the stars, not as subjects of a greater power, but as free people choosing their own journey. It wouldn't be easy. It would probably be dangerous. Humans might fail. They might succeed. They might make terrible mistakes or achieve incredible things. But whatever happened next, it would be humanity's choice. And that, Marcus thought, was worth every sacrifice they had made.